What is the most rich thing you've seen wealthy people say/do casually? My friends bought a house in Palm Springs, but the renovation was taking too long, so they simply bought a second house in Beverly Hills to live in during the renovations. They kept both. A relative bought a house in Malibu Colony, right on the beach, to live in while their Palisades home was being remodeled. Then they told me they kept the Malibu home because it was easier than returning to Palisades after a day at the beach. My dad knows a billionaire who had a French chateau disassembled and reassembled in the US. He acted like it was just as normal as building a house. My dad has been there a few times and said it's an insane property with a huge man-made lake and huge sprawling lawns. I was at a bar with the billionaire CEO of the company I worked for. He made fun of Oprah for only having one jet, then went on to tell me to never buy helicopters because they are built by the lowest bidder. Planes are the better choice. Bob, my car didn't even have air conditioning. I work part-time at a strip club and we have some very wealthy clientele. Some of them come in all the time, and we get to know a lot about them, and they get to know a lot about us. Well, one of our security guys died of a sudden massive heart attack. One of the rich clientele just called the funeral home and paid for everything, like there was no second thought. We were all taking up a collection to help a bit and he just dropped the whole bill just like that. I mean, I see a lot of really rich behavior, but that one was just so mind-blowing. I used to work in a jewelry store and the stories are endless. Clients would talk about how they just got back from a months-long trip on a yacht or some exotic island. I'm just like, cool, I put in 60+ hours this week and have worked every day of the week, lol. The thing that I wouldn't get at all is the watch guys. I had a client come in one time and ask for the cheapest watch we had, so he didn't have to worry about it on his trip. He ended up going with an $800 watch, not the cheapest, and while I was checking him out, he said he was going to throw it away after the trip. I tried talking him out of it and just said return it afterwards, but then he seemed insulted. Other watch guys would pay $1,000 every year just to get a little scratch on their Rolex that only they notice buffed out. I'd explain to them that they're shaving precious metal off every time and ruining the integrity of the watch, but they'd gaffe because their egos are so massive. We'd hold private events and encourage clients to bring their friends, and it would always turn into a dick-swinging contest of who can spend more. Absolutely wild environment, and I was absolutely burnt out after 2 years. Most money I ever made, but most miserable I've ever been. It was from an 8-year-old. My very wealthy friend got remarried and her son said he wouldn't mind staying with me while they went on their honeymoon. As we took our seats on the plane, he looked so confused. He sheepishly asked, "Who are all these people on your plane?" "Oh, my little dude. I photograph luxury homes and architecture for a living. There's a neighborhood I do a lot of work in called Silverleaf, and it's probably the most exclusive neighborhood in the valley. The bottom part of the neighborhood is your typical wealthy people's homes. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, etc. Extremely nice houses, but still attainable for anyone who wants to put in the effort to work those types of careers. As you drive towards the back of the neighborhood, you start heading up a mountain that's divided into 2 parts. Upper Canyon and the summit. There are probably 100 houses up there. The houses start close to 15 million, but several are over 20 to 30. One of the builders I work with is developing a house he's asking about 60 million for. I work Upper Canyon every month or two, and even though all of the houses are owned, half or less are lived in. For some, it's a vacation home they might visit for a few weeks or months of the year, and for others, it's an investment and a place to park their money. I photographed a $15 million house there a few years ago. The owner was selling it because he bought a $29 million house literally 2 or 3 lots up because he liked the views more. He's a Canadian business owner and spends maybe a few months a year in the valley, if that. I'm used to it now, but for a long time I couldn't wrap my head around how much money some people have. See, this is what I mean when I say I want to be rich and am sad I'll never get there. People always respond saying something like, just invest and in 40 years you'll have $1 million. Or the truly wealthy people drive Toyotas and shop at Costco. That isn't rich, that's well off. In my opinion, if you have the money but can't spend it however you want, you're not rich. Rich is I want that lot for the views and don't know or care what it costs. I worked for a company where I had good access to the CEO, which had access to the owners. He told me about when one of the owners wanted to buy a helicopter, but the specific model was not readily available. The last one was just sold, and he would need to wait a couple of months. The guy then made the helicopter shop call the other buyer, which answered he was not interested, but he would sell for 50% more. They closed the deal within the hour. It was an insane amount of money from my point of view, but for him, it was like, yeah, I want this toy. The CEO told me this to illustrate that discussing budget with them was usually a frivolous effort. We should always frame the conversations in terms of market impact.
I worked at a sporting goods store in my early 20s and got absolutely yelled at by an old man for not knowing who he was when I asked him for ID. Apparently, he owned like half the town and others in the store would kiss his ass. At $9 an hour, I wasn't paid enough to kiss his ass even if I cared who he was. I wasn't from there and had only seen him come in a few times to buy random stuff. But either way, the damn federal government requires you to produce ID to purchase a firearm, and I was doing my job. It's been over 20 years and my husband, who has heard the story, sometimes looks at me and exclaims, "You seriously don't know who I am?"
Ha ha ha. I work at the front door of a strip club and there are always people trying to get in without paying the $20 cover. My favorite is when they say, "Do you know who I am?" And I reply, "No, sir. Will it be cash or card?" And then they usually say something like, "I can't believe you don't know who I am." I always respond with, "I'm sorry, sir, that information is probably in your wallet, on your identification, if you've forgotten." Oh, and the ones that scoff when I say it's $20 and they say, "Do you know how much money I have?" And I say, "Then you should be able to afford $20. LOL. Fortunately, my boss doesn't care that most of us have quite a sharp tongue. I know an almost billionaire who is very, very sweet. He kept his oceanfront condo for his mother-in-law to stay in for like a month a year, and he went to it every day to feed the stray cats who lived around it. The place is paid for, mind you, but it has high fees, a paid parking spot, utilities, etc. that cost almost 20 grand a year. Contractor here. A lady didn't like the shape of the pool at the new house. Gets the job to change the shape, does the job. So I tell her we can guarantee the workmanship for 5 years, but not any longer. She says cool, we are only here for 3. There's a large liquor store near me. They have very expensive bottles in the back room. One Christmas I was standing in line. The man in front of me had 1 case of wine, 12 bottles of various varieties. The cashier said, "Okay, that will be $27,455. WTF? Guy hands over his credit card. I followed him out. He drove away in a Bentley. I live not far from an old, now abandoned, castle in France. It was bought decades ago by a Chinese couple. They had the staircase taken out and shipped to China and just left the place and never returned. It's been neglected since. I had a friend of mine casually ask if I wanted to go to Dubai for a week to do some skydiving training in a couple of weeks. My response was no. I have to work for a living. It blew my mind when they asked me like it was no big deal to duck out for a week and blow $15,000.
My sister married a man 15 years her senior and he is very wealthy, and when his parents die they will inherit 15+ million. Wealth does in fact change people. My husband and I struggle financially, not going hungry but making ends meet is hard, and definitely no rainy day fund or savings to be had, and I am constantly shocked because once I asked hypothetically if we could live in her guest house if we ever lost our house, and her response was, "If you're so irresponsible you could ever lose your house then you deserve to lose it." Baffled. We only talk about our shared past, anything beyond that feels awkward. She is not the same person she was, but maybe on some level she is. She's always been shallow, and she did not choose this person as her husband because she loved him. But yeah, wealth made her insufferable. They don't even have real hobbies. Also, they are tone deaf. We live in a 1000 SQ/50 house and they live in 3500, and her husband said to me that they feel so cooped up in their small house. Like okay.
Years ago I helped coordinate an event in the Cayman Islands for my job for the company's main clients. I worked closely with a small business that sets up events. Not only did they make my work infinitely easier, but they offered us discounts on several events. Really good people that would work around the clock to make sure everything was getting set up properly. On the island, right before we were going to one of the events, my boss's wife tells my boss, and me indirectly, always got the feeling she did not like talking to me, that we need to get a discount on the upcoming event. She was not involved in the setting up process and didn't even know any details or the costs involved. She just wanted the discount. It was a private catamaran tour which ended with swimming with the stingrays for a few hours, and it was for about 20 people. I had to call the company and ask them for the discount while apologizing profusely. The boss's wife wanted to knock $4,000 off the total. After a lot of conversation and back and forth I got the discount. I was disgusted with the look on her face after I told her we got the discount. For the rest of the trip I stayed away from her, as I knew that she would continuously ask for me to fight for discounts, just because. When she passed, I looked her up and found out that not only was she rich, she was Texas oil baroness rich. Money edging towards the billions. For $1,000 is nothing to that family, like finding pennies in your couch cushions. My boss and his wife had kids who felt neglected, and the oldest would, without fail, destroy something expensive. I was in the room when a secretary told the wife that her son had destroyed another antique roadster. The boss collected them. She barely shrugged her shoulders. I think she just wanted the discount because she was such an empty person. Maybe the power trip makes them feel something. Had one of the outside salesmen drop in, and we were talking about clothes for some reason. He said he donates his clothes to charity every year, so he doesn't buy the very expensive shirts. His shirts are $300 each. Then he tells me he does buy decent shoes though. He showed me a company online where most of the shoes cost more than my car. How do we work for the same company and live that differently? And well, friends, that was all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, let me know with a thumbs up so that YouTube can share these stories with more people. Remember to hit the bell icon to be the first to know when we upload a new video. See you next time.